A lack of clarity on Justin Fields' status going into Monday night gives the Jets a bit of an advantage. Aaron Glenn should not and will not be one and done, and there are reasons the Jets cannot make a big stop. Locked On Jets begins now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Friday, September 26th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today, we are going to talk Justin Fields' status as he tries to return from a concussion. We are going to talk about why Aaron Glenn needs more than 1 year to prove himself. We're going to talk about why the Jets struggle so frequently to make big stops and how this has been an issue that's been going on for years for many coaching staffs and so much more. It is our weekly mailbag. Thanks so much to everybody who sent in your mailbag questions. Normally, we try and do our mailbag shows on Wednesday. This week, we had to push it back because the Jets, of course, made the trade for Jarvis Brownlee, placed a couple linebackers on IR. So we're going to do our weekly mailbag today. Let's begin our first question. John, do we have any updates on Justin Fields' injury status? Short answer, yes. Long answer, yes, but we're still not sure whether he's going to play Monday night. So Aaron Glenn on Thursday announced that Fields will start if he's cleared medically to play Monday night, but he has not been cleared medically yet. He did, however, return to practice on Thursday, which is a positive sign. Now, you might be asking, well, how could he be cleared to practice but not be cleared yet to play a game? And the answer to that is simple. In practice, you cannot hit the quarterback. The quarterback usually wears a red jersey, which indicates you cannot hit him. So the threshold for returning to practice is much lower than it is actually playing in a game. You know, the risk to Fields on the practice field are low because he's not going to get hit. Everybody knows you can't hit the quarterback. Even if Fields was completely healthy, even if Fields was not coming back from a concussion, everybody would know you're not allowed to hit Justin Fields. So it's low risk having in practice. A game, obviously, much different story. But it seems like the fact Fields is practicing indicates that the Jets are optimistic about his ability to play Monday. And a lot of this goes to how NFL teams prepare for a game each week. Usually you begin installing your game plan on Wednesday. Tuesday is the day off for the players. Monday is the day where you go and you watch film, you get medical treatment, you get ice, you kind of recover from the Sunday game. Tuesday is your day off. That's where the coaches are at the office all day coming up with the game plan. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is when you practice. You start putting in the game plan, the plays you're going to run against the opponent. This week, because the game's on Monday, Jet schedule's pushed back a day. So they did not begin installing the game plan until yesterday. But if you thought Fields was not going to play, you would want Tyrod Taylor getting those first team reps because it doesn't do the Jets a lot of good if Tyrod's starting this game for the game plan to be implemented around Fields. Another aspect of this is that on the offensive side of the ball, the plays you would want to call for Tyrod Taylor are different from the plays you would want to call from Justin Fields. So your offensive game plan is going to change quite a bit. So the fact Fields is there working, again, that's another sign the Jets think he's on the road to starting Monday night. And this is a case where I think a little bit of ambiguity could help the Jets out because just as your offensive game plan will change whether Justin Fields or Tyrod Taylor is in there, the Miami defensive game plan will change quite a bit also because if Fields is in there, it's going to be a run-heavy approach for the Jets. You're going to come up with designed runs for Fields. It's going to be a very diverse run game. If Tyrod's in there, it's going to look much more like a conventional NFL offense. So your defensive approach is going to change. I remember going back to week one. I kind of laughed at Aaron Glenn because he wasn't telling us whether Joe Tippmann or Josh Myers was going to start at center. Of course, it ended up being a moot point because Elijah Vera Tucker got injured that week. And it's not like Pittsburgh's game plan was going to change based on who the center was. But the Miami game plan could change quite a bit based on who's under center for the Jets. So if the Jets know that Fields is going to be cleared to play, they don't really have a lot of incentive to tip the Dolphins off. Keep a little doubt in Miami's mind because then it forces Miami perhaps to dedicate some practice time to working on defenses that you'll run against Tyrod Taylor. That could be wasted practice time for the Jets. So we don't have a final answer yet, but Fields returning to the practice field is a suggestion that he's likely to play Monday. At least that would be how I would read the situation, because there's no good reason to have Fields out there on the practice field if he's not going to play, because those reps would be better in that case going to Tyrod Taylor. So it feels like we're trending in that direction. We don't have any official word yet. All Glenn would tell us was something we already knew, that if Fields is cleared to play, he will play. He will start instead of Tyrod Taylor. Next question, John. Assuming the season goes off the rails, could you see the Jets being active sellers at the deadline? What players do you think could be moved? Well, I don't want to go on a rant, but they should have been active sellers at the deadline last year, because they had a lot of veteran players who probably had value, who they could have gotten something for, maybe not a lot in some of the cases, but there were players they could have gotten at least a late round pick for, maybe even a pick swap. And for whatever reason, even though they clearly were going nowhere, they decided to not trade any of them other than Mike Williams, who was kind of made obsolete by the Devontae Adams trade. So we're bringing back like really bad memories for me. I think definitely the Jets could be sellers at the deadline. This is clearly a team at the start of yet another rebuild. This is clearly a team that has focused on a youth movement. Which players could go at the deadline? I think the obvious ones would be guys in the final year of their contract who are not likely to return in 2026. Now, I think it's too early to make those predictions definitively yet, but I think there are two guys who might be trending in that direction. One of them would be Breece Hall. Week one, man, I saw Breece Hall and I got so excited because I had given up on the idea of Breece being an elite back in this league. And then he gets there week one, and suddenly, for the first time in maybe 3 years, he looks like that dynamic runner, the guy we saw carry the Jets offense through the first 7 games in 2022. He's decisively hitting his holes, something he had not done in a long time. And I thought, man, Breece in a contract year, maybe this is going to work. And then last week came, and we reverted back to the guy of 2023 and 2024, who was very hesitant, who was not reading his blocks well, who was not hitting his holes. And if that's the guy Breece Hall is going to be going forward, I think you trade him for what you can get at the deadline, because he's not a guy that's going to be here for the long haul. And Breece will have value to some team out there. If you have a team that runs like a primarily gap blocking scheme, when they have a good offensive line that can open big holes, Breece Hall has the chance to be a really effective back for you. Breece Hall, if you have a team that's built to take advantage of what Breece Hall does well, and that's hitting the home run, that's using that speed, and you can open holes for him, and you'll design the holes he's going through, and you can open it for him, he'll do very well. In a situation where, and this is the situation most teams have, where he's going to have to read blocks, it's going to be inconsistent. You'll have some games that are good, some games that are bad. So I think that Breece could be a guy who goes on the deadline. Quincy Williams, now it's complicated because he's injured. He's on IR, so he's missing at least the next 4 weeks. But last couple of weeks, Quincy Williams has not looked great. Quincy Williams has kind of reverted to the guy from 2021, 2022, who would make the splash play for you. He'd make a big play, but there are also situations where he gets too aggressive, where he over pursues, and he's responsible for some really big plays going against the Jets. In 23 and 24, it felt like he had kind of learned how to channel that energy. He wasn't overrunning plays anymore. He wasn't missing tackles because he was going for the knockout blow. That's the way he was in 21 and 22. And through the first 3 weeks of the season, I mean, he's looked more like the guy who was inconsistent, who was up and down, who could make the splash play that's good for you, but also make the splash play that's bad for you. And if this is the version of Quincy Williams we're getting this year, I don't know that he's going to come back. He's in the final year of his deal. So that's another guy who could be traded, another guy who's going to have value. Look, this is a guy who was a first-team All-Pro 2 years ago. There are going to be teams that need linebackers. Maybe somebody suffers an injury at some point, or maybe somebody's just looking to add some speed at the linebacker position. So I'm not ready to give up on either of these guys yet. I'm not ready to say that these guys should be traded. I'm not ready to say they will be traded. But based on the first 3 weeks of the season, these are the guys you got to have your eye on, because if a player's not coming back to the Jets next year, you should trade him and get what you can for him if the team's not going to the playoffs. And I know some people may say, well, what about compensatory picks? I don't think the Jets are going to be in line for compensatory picks next year. You got to lose more than you get. And this is a Jets team that I think is going to have to make some additions in free agency in the year ahead. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about Aaron Glenn. I've stated my case that he should not be one and done this year. There's very little that could change my mind. Somebody wants to know, is there anything that could change my mind? The answer is yes, but it's very unlikely. I'll tell you what it is as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode is brought to you by Square. Your favorite neighborhood spots run on Square. There are certain businesses that truly make the neighborhood feel like home, whether it's the local sports bar packed on game days, the coffee shop that knows your order by heart, or the corner deli that's been serving your community for decades. These are the places that bring people together. When neighborhood businesses thrive, the whole neighborhood thrives. What makes a spot feel like home? The kind of place where you walk in and everyone knows your name. The staff are like family and they've been serving your community for years. Supporting a community, what does it look like? Spending money there doesn't just support the business, it supports the people behind it and the community around it. Those local spots are what make the neighborhood feel like home, and so many of them run on Square. Square is a proud partner of more than 4 million neighborhood businesses around the world. You can go to square.com/go/LockedOnNFL to learn more. But before you do, go support your favorite neighborhood spot. You'll be happy you did. Square, see you in the neighborhood. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by DoorDash. It's almost the weekend. Time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order, these players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. And for the Jets, Garrett Wilson delivered in a big way. There were not many consistent performers on the offense last Sunday in the loss to Tampa Bay, but Garrett goes out. He delivers every single week. And just like Garrett Wilson delivered for the Jets, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday you order. Stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. And a big shout out to you, everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue now with our weekly mailbag. Our next question comes from Taylor, who writes, "Hey, John, I listened to your defense of Aaron Glenn on Tuesday, and I was curious what it would take to convince you that he should be a one-and-done coach, a la Adam Gase, who should have been fired after 2019. I know we are all supposed to be patient, but it is incredibly frustrating to me to see good coaches instantly turn other teams around in the league while we stare down the barrel of a lost 2 decades of Jets fandom. What are your thoughts?" Well, I want to preface what I'm about to say with the fact that I'm not defending the job the coaching staff has done through the first 3 weeks of the season. You may go back to the offseason. I was saying that I thought the Jets would be better than the experts were indicating. And a lot of that was based on the hope that this would be a coaching staff that instilled discipline on this team, that the Jets would be opportunistic, that the Jets would be a smart football team. And we have seen none of that happen so far. And if the Jets were a disciplined, smart team, they would be 2-1 right now. They would have beaten the Steelers and they would have beaten the Bucs. Unfortunately, their lack of discipline, their lack of smart play really cost them 2 games that could have been won. So I'm not saying Glenn's off to a good start, but here's the thing. Aaron Glenn hasn't been the coach for 2 decades. So I think Taylor's point kind of hits the nail on the head of what the issue is right now, is I think Aaron Glenn's being held responsible for a lot of the past sins of Jets coaches. Aaron Glenn's only been here 3 weeks, and we need more time to see whether he's a quality coach. To me, the only time you get rid of a coach after 1 year is when it's just such a disaster where a coach looks so unredeemably bad that you have to move on. It's almost like you don't have a choice. And I know some people are probably going to say, well, Glenn looks like that. I'd say, well, first of all, there's only been 3 weeks. But second is, I think a big part of a coach looking irredeemably bad is the locker room has to quit on him. I remember when Urban Meyer was in Jacksonville, I pretty much gave up on that before their first training camp because it was clear it was not going to work out. It was clear he had already alienated players. It was clear this was a college coach who really had no business being in the NFL. A situation like that, or a situation like last year with Gerard Mayo, who by week 3 was already calling his players out in the press. Everybody gets mad at Aaron Glenn because he's being positive, he's talking up his players. Well, compare it with what was happening with Gerard Mayo a year ago, where Gerard Mayo was trashing his players in the press. And it was clear Gerard Mayo was not ready to be a head coach in the NFL. Maybe Gerard Mayo will be one day, but he was not ready last year to be a head coach in the NFL. So I think that we need much more time. One of the things, like I talked about on Tuesday, is a key part of showing you can coach in this league is turning it around when you hit a rough patch. Every coach in this league is going to hit a rough patch eventually. So you got to have a chance you have to give this guy a chance to show that he can fight his way out of it. And when I say a rough patch, I don't mean an 0-2 start that turns into 0-3. I'm not talking about an 0-3 that turns into 0-4. I'm talking about you have a rough season. How do you respond to it? How do you turn it around? How do you adjust? I think that's something that's critical. That's something we need to find out in a head coach. And look, there's another factor here. The Jets fired Robert Saleh after 5 games into last season. If you turn around after that and fire Aaron Glenn after 1 year, who's going to take this job? It's going to send a signal that they're not going to be patient with anybody. They're not going to give anybody a chance to turn the situation around. And that's not defending Robert Saleh. Look, I've been very critical of Robert Saleh during his tenure as Jets head coach, but the Jets should not have fired him 5 games into the last season. And I don't think Aaron Glenn should be fired after 1 year. There's only one other exception I would make, and that's if like you go out and get like a proven coach, a guy who's just like a top of the line coach, somebody who's a proven commodity in this league, like a top 5, a guy who's just like elite that nobody could argue about. So, like 2 years ago, a Sean Payton or a Jim Harbaugh. But I don't know who that would be right now of the coaches who are available. And I don't think Woody Johnson really has the wherewithal to get that type of coach, because that requires discretion. That requires proactive communication. It requires forward thinking. And none of these things are Woody Johnson's skill set. What if the Jets fired Glenn after 1 year? I mean, we've had 7 coaching hires under the Johnson brothers. We have a formula. They'll go out and hire some consultant to run the search. And really the reason for that is that the Johnson brothers want someone to blame if it goes wrong. We can say, well, this guy told, the consultant told us to hire this guy. So the Johnson brothers always do. And you'll probably get an inexperienced coach again, and we'll be right back where we were next year. So I don't see the rationale for even considering firing Aaron Glenn right now. I need to see a lot more bad football. I don't think I could get there after 1 year. I think it would just send things into chaos. And if we're being honest, it wouldn't really give Glenn a chance, because everybody knew this team was going to be bad this year. We knew 2 years ago the 2025 was going to be a rough year, because the Jets were borrowing so much cap space. They were sending so many draft picks out to try and load up around Rodgers. Like, the argument people made at the time was, I don't care if we're bad in 2025. Now, of course, a lot of those people do care. But I think nobody wants to hear that we need to have patience because we've missed the playoffs 14 straight years. But unfortunately, we need to have patience, because it's not fair to Aaron Glenn. Aaron Glenn hasn't been here the last 14 years. Aaron Glenn is just starting in year 1, and it's going to take him some time to learn how to be a head coach. Next question. What are your initial thoughts on the Brownlee trade? I don't know much about him, but I can't imagine he'll be much better than JBC, who we gave away. Tell me I'm wrong, and he'll be a major upgrade to our secondary. I don't know if it'll be a major upgrade. I do think there's a decent chance he'll be better than Brandon Stevens. Now, it's not clear that Brownlee's going to play this week. In fact, Aaron Glenn yesterday termed him week to week, which usually is a sign that the guy's not imminently about to return. I think the move was like maybe a half step above a waiver claim. I think if the Jets got this guy off waivers, they probably would not have spent that much less. And I don't think anybody would care about it. But the fact they had this minimal draft pick compensation changing hands turns it into this move that people really, really care about. Titans fans really like the guy, but I get the feeling that's one of those situations like we have with the Jets where whenever a late round pick shows even a pulse, we hype him up and we act like he's a great player. His numbers were not great last year. His skill set, I think there are some question marks. And I go back to what I said the other day. I think that his skill set might lend him to be a better slot corner than an outside guy in the future. As far as Jarek Bernard Converse goes, is Brownlee better than Converse? I don't know. I think it's a coin toss. The one thing I'll say is if JBC was here right now, he'd get a chance to play. It might be at corner for Stevens. It might be at safety because JBC's played both. He would have a chance to play right now. And the Jets obviously kept Quantez Stiggers over JBC because Stiggers plays special teams. And I agree with that. I like the idea of focusing on special teams. And Stiggers has 4 tackles in 3 games. He's played well on special teams. The only issue I had with cutting Jarek Bernard Converse is, why'd you keep Xavier Gipson? I mean, if your receiver room's so weak that you're keeping Xavier Gipson, keep one less receiver and keep a promising young defensive back in JBC. That's the issue I have with cutting him loose. But I'd say it's a coin toss between Brownlee and JBC. I mean, I can't. I don't think I think if anybody tells you that they know definitively one guy's going to be better than the other, they're just kind of making it up. I think it's really a coin toss. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, there's been one issue that has popped up time and again with the Jets over the last couple of years. And it didn't start with Aaron Glenn. It didn't even start with Robert Saleh. Why can't the Jets get big stops? I have one thought on that, and I'll tell you what it is as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else as of August 2025. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details. Mazda brings the same intention to how they craft every model. You can feel craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda. Move and be moved. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Friday, we're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question comes from Kevin, who writes, John, there have been many instances over the last 6 years that I've been a listener of your show where the Jets have been up a score and needed to stop and failed to get it. It's been a common thread in the Bowles, Saleh, and now Glenn era. Is this just the looming curse of Joe Namath or some other sort of witchcraft? Why can't we ever seem to get the big stop? Well, there's no simple answer to that, Kevin, but there is one thing that really jumps out to me. And I want you to think for a minute. When you're trying to close out a game, who are you really counting on to be the closer on a defense? I would say it's the edge rusher to get a sack, because in a 2-minute situation, a sack destroys everything. Now, in a normal offensive drive, a sack destroys everything. But in a hurry-up offense where you're desperate for a score, a sack just destroys you, because your receivers are all downfield. So now they got to get back. That usually takes a lot of time unless you take a timeout. Then your offense is really behind the sticks. It's an obvious it becomes an obvious passing down. A sack just finishes you off. And I think it even goes back before Bowles. I mean, Rex Ryan's defenses, for as good as some of them were, their one weakness was getting the big stop. I mean, there were lots of times, even in 2009, 2010, where the Jets had a late lead and they allowed the other team to go down the field and score. So those were very, very highly regarded defenses, and even they struggled. And when was the last time the Jets had a great pass rusher? It was probably John Abraham. And I'll throw out one other fact. I actually looked back through this because I wanted to make sure my memory was not faulty. Believe it or not, sometimes I forget stuff. I know you. I'll give you a second to collect yourself there. I'm sure that was a shocking statement to hear that. Sometimes I forget stuff. But I think about like the last 14 years or so. During this era of Jets futility, there really have only been 2 years where the Jets were deep at the edge rusher spot. They were 2022 and 2023. And I went through those games, and look, there were lots of losses. Jets went 7-10 both years. So there were 20 losses. But of those 20 losses, there was only one that came because the Jets failed to close out a game in the fourth quarter with a lead. It was the Detroit game in 2022, and the Jets lost that one because there was a long run after a catch where Detroit scored a late touchdown. But that was the one era where the Jets were deep at the edge spot. And they closed out games in that era. So I don't think it's an accident. Like the one stretch where the Jets had good talent pass rushing off the edge was also the stretch where they did not blow games at the end. And other than that, it's been a real issue the last couple of years. So again, no simple answers. I'm sure it's more complex. I'm sure there are more things we can go into, but that's what really comes to the top of my mind, because that's the guy you get on defense. When you go out and get like a big time edge rusher, one of the biggest roles he's got is he's the guy you are counting on to close out games. He's the guy you're counting on to get that sack in the fourth quarter, to shut the other team down, to close the door. And the Jets just haven't had that guy. I mean, I think in many ways the Jets have not replaced John Abraham, who was traded from this team in 2006. I mean, they've had some good edge rushers since then. I think Calvin Pace was a decent edge rusher. I think, Bryce Huff was a decent edge rusher. I think John Franklin Myers was a decent edge rusher, but they haven't really had that guy. In Sunday's game, Will McDonald had a spectacular play. Like, you can't take the block and the touchdown away from Will, but he was held off the stat sheet. It was second straight week where he did practically nothing as a pass rusher. That's got to change going forward. And of course, we did not have Jermaine Johnson in the lineup last week. But you know what? I think you look to your defensive ends. more than he looked at anybody in those spots. And there are some other things. I mean, there have been a lot of situations where the only reason the defense was on the field in the first place was the offense had a chance to run the clock out and didn't do it. That happened week 1 against Pittsburgh. And I don't want to complain too much about the Jets offense week 1 because they scored in almost every possession. But the one situation they failed was they had a chance to grind that game out and run out the clock with a lead in the fourth quarter and didn't do it. Lots of factors, but I'm going with the pass rush as number 1. Our next question, John. So far, any personnel changes have been either on defense or special teams. Is there a chance before the deadline the Jets swing a trade for an offensive skill position player? Well, of course, there's a chance. I think what's been clear with this Jets front office and this Jets coaching staff is they are not going to be afraid to pull off a trade to address a problem spot because they have now done it 3 times. They made the 2 trades for defensive tackle at the end of the preseason, and then they trade for Brownlee at the cornerback spot. So, yeah, I think it's possible. Now, I don't think you're getting a big name. I don't think you're getting a guy who's going to be a difference maker. The guys that they've traded for have been relatively small names. They've been guys who have not cost much, guys who were just on the outs of with their old team. So I think if the Jets trade for a wide receiver, it would be somebody who's a bit of a project player, somebody who maybe has natural ability, somebody who's maybe flashed here or there, and just for whatever reason, his career with his current team has come to a natural end. So yeah, I think it could happen, but I would not expect a big name if the Jets made the move. I think that it's probably going to be a smaller move. And look, given the state of the receiver room where you got Josh Reynolds and Tyler Johnson and Alan Lazard seeing big snaps, perhaps they could pull off an upgrade there. That's not a tough thing to upgrade on. And our last question, am I wrong, or did we pay big money to a defensive lineman who never gets sacks in Quinnen Williams, a number 1 corner who never gets interceptions and frequently draws flags in Sauce Gardner, and a number 1 receiver who never breaks the game open and rarely scores touchdowns in Garrett Wilson? These guys are supposed to be building blocks, but we spend more time rationalizing why they've underachieved than we do celebrating any hopeful flashes of greatness. What I'd say is I think the Garrett Wilson one's unfair. Garrett Wilson's off to a great start this season. I think it's very difficult to have issues with what Garrett Wilson's done so far this season. I mean, you can get on him a little bit for not coming back to the ball in the Tyrod Taylor interception, but as I said on Monday's show, I love Jonathan Vilma as a player. I think he got that wrong. That was much more on Tyrod Taylor than it was Garrett Wilson. Tyrod Taylor can't throw that ball. Sauce has been off to an uneven start. I'll give you that. And Quinnen's off to an uneven start. But these are both guys who have been first-team All-Pros in the past. So, I think what the Jets sometimes what happens is we get on the good players when really we should be getting on everyone else. Like I see people hold it against Garrett Wilson that he's not a top 5 receiver. I think Garrett's more like a top 15 type receiver. Well, the issue is not Garrett Wilson failing to be a top 5 receiver. The issue is you don't have a number 2 receiver. I mean, Sauce got to pick up his game a little bit from what we've seen the last 2 weeks, but he's still a guy who's a great corner. Our issue is Brandon Stevens and Michael Carter II playing terrible football. On the defensive line, yeah, look, Quinnen's got to get off. Quinnen's got to play better. But I don't think Quinnen's the problem. I think we sometimes spend too much time blaming the guys who are actually good and not enough blaming the guys who are bad. I mean, I looked at the problems on the Jets. Those are not the 3 places I'm looking. I'm looking at the guys who are actually weak points on the defense and offense. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and you're listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your weekend. We'll be back on Monday to preview Jets Dolphins Monday Night Football Week 4.